I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Peter Duke. I'm the new manager of Land and Building Services, and we're happy to be putting on a series of webinars for the building industry. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Ken Kunka, who's going to be leading us through these webinars going forward. These will all be recorded, so they'll be available after the fact if there's anybody who happen to miss them. Those will be posted on our website. Just give us a couple of days to sort that out, but those should be put up there. I'll just be muting everyone's microphones, but feel free to type questions or comments into the chat, and we can grab them there. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Great, thank you, Peter. Just want to start by excusing myself. I picked up a bit of a cold this weekend, so when my voice goes into Batman mode, I know I'm not doing great, but having my cough syrup and we should be ready to go. All right, as Peter said, the city is making a commitment to improving the permit process and communication to building industry members. The city will be providing 5 online sessions this spring to review local building regulations, the national code, and an overview of the building permit process, which this session will actually focus on. This presentation is conceptual and for informal educational purposes only. The presentation is not considered exhaustive. I'm just going to touch on codes and bylaws pretty today, but I really suggest that you do a deep dive as we work through the 5 sessions over the next few months. The code provision generally represented may not reflect all provisions. As Peter said, we're committed to 5 workshops. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you as a builder group, and the time I had up in Whitehorse was fantastic. I've never been up there, and it was really great to be able to see the town, and really looking forward to making it back in the summer. So today we're going to look at codes and bylaws and regulations and expansion of what we did in the workshop. And then we'll move into the more technical items. Eventually, all these webinar series will roll into a online and a hard copy guide for permits for residential permit types, which I hope will help in the permit and inspection process. Session housekeeping, tracking the registration. The presentation, as Peter noted, will be recorded. I'll also forward a PDF copy of the presentation, especially if there's any slight changes on comments or questions that come up. Please raise your hand. You'll notice on the top of your screen, there's a number of icons in the raise your hand. I'm working off 2 screens, so I'm going to try to watch the chat as we go along. So please put any comments in the chat. I did have some poll questions created, but unfortunately, we didn't get them created. So we'll just work on those in the chat for answers. Please keep your mic muted, and you'd probably want to keep your camera off just for bandwidth. And if you have any specific questions or comments or examples to provide, good or bad, you can send them to me at ken@flywheel@gmail.com. The learning objectives for session 1 today. This session has been developed to assist the building industry partners to gain a better understanding of the following topics: building regulations as a whole. We'll do a little bit of a breaking into the national code and the different divisions, and then a few sections within part 9 as we lead into session 2 and 3, which will be a deep dive in foundations, drainage, and radon and those type of things. We'll also like to touch on the permit process. We didn't really touch on that on the workshop. We did. The city has brought in a consultant. They made a number of recommendations. I don't know the exact results from that, but I know that a number of permit processes has changed. They will be changing. So I just wanted to touch on a number of those. Who am I? My background, I come from Thunder Bay, Ontario, so I know the cold. I finished with a diploma in architectural design. I spent the last 30 years here in BC as a building official. 13 of those were building and permitting manager for the city of Penticton. I've been heavily involved in the Building Officials Association of BC, volunteer and now a consultant and designer. Been through numerous code cycles. The last one being the harmonization of the BC and the national code. They still have a ways to go, but it's been a bit of a learning curve for me to think of national code. So you bear with me. I asked a lot of questions the last time I was there, so I'm hoping I have the right mind frame. For all the harmonization they've done, there's still actually a lot of little nuances of differences between the two. Right now, as I mentioned, I'm a designer consultant, and I've been working with a number of local governments, including Whitehorse, on systems and training staff. And I really like the ability to sit down like we're doing now and talk as a group, both building officials, industry partners, builders, designers, those type of things. So in the chat, since I can't get the poll questions, if you could just in the chat, just maybe quickly write down, if you're a builder, tradesperson, a supplier, registered professional designer, I'd really like to be able to get an idea. So feel free to put that in the chat and I'll keep going with the presentation. So construction regulations, the 3 levels of government, there's 4 areas of construction regulations. There's the Municipal Act, the Building Standards Act, the local bylaws, and the national codes and standards. Federally, Canada's constitution gives 10 provinces and the 3 territories jurisdiction over construction. Some cities have their own authority through a special relationship with the provincial authority, though Vancouver would be a great example. They have their own charter. Whitehorse is unique as well, and I'll mention that in the next slide. The enact building and fire regulations, and the province and territories and municipalities pass legislation that references the relevant codes. In Canada, the provincial and territories authorities have jurisdictions responsible for adopting, enforcing laws and regulations, providing interpretation of such laws, providing training and education, which we're doing right now, and establishing roles and responsibilities of trades and peoples. And that's what we hope to do over this session and the next couple coming sessions. Who's part of the party, what responsibilities and what authority each party has, particularly the local government here. Yukon Territory and building safety standards. So they regulate under the Building Standards Act and the Municipal Act. There's some really great information on the Yukon website, but as the map shows, Whitehorse is really a standalone and it represents the majority of the population in construction, but there is some interaction between the two. And I do believe that there'll be a lot more over the next months and this year of the Yukon government and Whitehorse coming together to help train themselves as building officials, as well as ensuring the building community as a whole, because you may be working in and out of the jurisdiction of the Whitehorse and into the Yukon government. So Yukon Territory, the building safety standards. This is an interesting. I had thought that there was a. Can you just remember to mute yourself? There's a mic symbol on the top right of your screen. So if you can just mute yourself, that'd be great. Here's appeals regarding denials and cancellations of permits or interpretations of the building code. This is really important because if you get in a bit of a loggerhead with your local government here in Whitehorse, there is an avenue. Unfortunately, things kind of slipped off the rails, and I believe the board is reestablishing itself. So it's really good, and I believe there's also some interpretations and appeal requests in right now. So keep your eye on that. If you would like to be more involved in construction and regulations, I would recommend that you would apply for this, and there's some links towards that. But it's a really great group, and again, that unbiased third party between you as the developer or designer on that side of the industry and the building officials in the town of Whitehorse. If there is a little bit of a disagreement, there's an avenue to review. I'm going to go over some of the regulations on a high level, and these are prescribed to outline what a jurisdiction can and can't do. So there's the Municipal Act, and I've listed a few sections here, and this is from the workshop that we did. There's general jurisdiction to pass bylaws, so that's really important to understand that the city just doesn't make up things. There are policies and things change from time to time as projects evolve, but really everything's based on establishing rules within a bylaw, and that's where the jurisdiction administers, particularly here. in exercising the bylaw, making power is 266, but restricting 265, which is telling you, there's the Building Standards Act and what those play in a part. Without restricting 265, a council may in bylaw pass under this division, regulate and control and prohibit, deal with any development activity, provide for any system license inspections, permits, or approvals. So again, that's where the city gets its authority to act related to construction. The Building Standards Act also ensures that the national code is the building code that will be used. It's funny, over the years, I've had people phone me, and especially here in the Okanagan, we have many little small towns, and we have Kelowna, the big city, and they kind of go, "What code are you using?" And it's like, we all are using the same code. We're using the BC code here locally, but it's the interpretation time what gets a little cloudy. And again, that's why we're having these sessions, to ensure that you understand kind of the premise where the city is coming out with developing bylaws and rules and processes, and where you can input and provide some commentary, perhaps making it better, because the city is making a lot of changes as a commitment to improve permit processing. So again, the national code is what we're working off, the 2020, except for otherwise provided in the act or the regulations, the construction, occupancy, and use of a building, and installation of use and component fixture system. So again, your plumbing, your heating appliances, those type of things. This act and regulations of building code, any permit issued under this act. So again, just a little bit of background on that. And I just focused here on the middle one, and this relates to the authority given to building officials in order to carry out their duties. And because we have a city and because they have a bylaw, the building officials are given, due course to regulate construction within the city of Whitehorse under the bylaws. So just a question again, you can use the chat, or we can just, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat, or if you'd like to use that raise your hand, I'd be happy to answer any questions either throughout the session, or I'm going to put these slides. I have had these slides in every few sections just to allow for a bit of time. So what legal document provides the city of Whitehorse the ability to administer building permits? And that would be the municipal act, sorry. Again, creating laws. And again, we don't make these things up. There's a process to ensure the city is following due course on it. Local bylaws. So again, we've gone from federal jurisdiction, Yukon, and now into a local area here. And really it's the city's building bylaw that is used to administer how construction permits is dealt with. And the bylaw applies to the design, construction, and occupancy of new buildings, and the alteration, construction, demolition, removal, location, and occupancy of existing buildings. That also includes the change of use, which we'll touch on a few times this session and upcoming session, especially near the end. The building code, which applies to all the work regulated by bylaw within the city of Whitehorse, prescribed in the Building Standards Act. And as the Building Standards Act noted, it's the national building code that we're working off. And this is just an example. The bylaw, it's a little bit older. It's adopted in 2016. It has had a few amendments, but particularly around dealing with step code and a few other items, or I shouldn't say step code, performance modeling. That's an avenue, but I just want to show it. And it's not a long document, so I would suggest it's not a fantastic read or anything like that, but it's good to know this, because just like you buy a tool, saw, whatever you'd use in your day-to-day operations, software system, it's really good to understand that this is really what we're building off of is the bylaw, and the bylaw will likely be updated as processes change. They kind of have to happen hand in hand as we move forward. The authority having jurisdiction, that is the city. So anything, so the city council is given that authority to develop bylaws, pretty in this case, construction. And they give authority now to the building officials to act on their behalf to ensure that construction and occupancy of buildings are maintained in accordance with the regulations. The bylaw can administer through two different ways. There's orders, there means of direction writing from the authority having jurisdiction to comply with the requirements of this bylaw. So those could be an inspection report. It could be a demand letter if unfortunately things start going sideways, either illegal construction or work's not conforming to the issued permit package. They also could include a bylaw notice or a ticket. So that's through orders, which nobody really likes to do other than through inspections of moving a project forward. They also can administer through permits. So again, why we're reviewing this in session one, I think it's really important to establish this ground base of why the city does the things it does and why it's needing to make changes and is making changes moving forward to help improve the processing of permits and ensuring that buildings are safe and viable in the long term here in the city. So in permits means an authorization writing issued by authority having jurisdiction. We'll go a little over that more near the end of the session today. A permit can be considered consent to conduct construction activities. I like that connotation of it. So again, the permit equals a consent to build, and the bylaw outlines, when you need a permit, when you don't need a permit. But really, a permit ensures general compliance with code and the city regulations. So not just the building bylaw and the building codes. It also, and if you've been through the process through the years, it also involves other bylaws, which we'll touch on as well. Ensures safety for family, workers, patrons, and emergency responders. So anybody going and using those buildings. It also now involves energy conservation and accessibility for all members of the community. It ensures long-term sustainability of the community. And what I mean by long-term sustainability of the community is making sure buildings are built well. The bylaw itself doesn't guarantee workmanship, being plumb and square, but ensures it meets minimum standards. It also ensures that part of the process is you're finishing out permits, and permits are not left, or buildings are not left incomplete, which kind of which will degrade the building over time. It's not finished off properly, and it also doesn't look very nice for the community as a whole to have unfinished buildings and projects, particularly when things are selling and purchasing, and then people find out that there's open permits. Not great for the community as a whole. It's protect the future owners of the building, and when I mean that, we usually think about customer service, providing customer service, and in our line of work as a building regulator, that's what we're hired to do. We're here to help you through the process as a building industry partner, but as you know, there's many gears and many hoops to go through to get to the end product, and you're our customer, but we have to think that then the next person in that building, the next owner, the person visiting, whether it's a short-term rental or a business opportunity, they're a customer. So the customer is anybody who's in those buildings or beside those buildings. We have to make sure that the building is built right and working with the fire department, it's maintained in the proper situation to keep it safe and viable. Creates a level permits and bylaws create a level playing field as well. If we didn't have permits, it'd be anything goes, and you see that in some unregulated communities. That how does somebody compete that wants to sit in a workshop like this in a morning session versus somebody who never wants to engage in the process and has always built the way they did and not meeting codes because there isn't a permit standard. So again, the city is outlining and helping you, our industry partners, develop a better understanding of permitting and codes, but also ensuring that there's a level playing field moving ahead. And permits also help in recording construction activities, so we know what's going on in the community and recording and relating to our budgets. And it partially offsets the operating costs. It doesn't cover all of it, not nearly. I don't think there's any discussions for fee increases. There always is, as the economy changes and inflation goes up, but at least permits help offset and not feed into the taxpayer support. Building and plumbing. Just going to go through these comments here, and I just wanted to highlight a few of the yellow sections here. And again, we'll be posting these and sending out the recording of this. But unless a valid and subsisting permit, so again, an active permit has been issued and carried on active. So if you have to renew a permit, if you can't meet the expiry dates, the authority should no person shall commence or continue any work. So again, commencing means an excavation. It means gutting out an interior building, commercial or residential. So again, just be mindful that talk to your building official here in Whitehorse that you're going to be doing some work, especially for renovation. You may start doing some exploratory work, but they don't want everything to be gutted out. They don't want to be a whole duck, especially in the winter months where you're getting some serious conditions with exposure to the elements. And the last one here, no person shall change an occupancy of use of a building without obtaining from the authority of having jurisdiction, city on occupancy approval, which allows for the changes of that. So this happens a lot for commercial alterations. People will lease a space and they won't think that they're really, needing to get a permit. They'll think about getting a license, but we'll find that it may change their use. It may change from an office space to a retail space, or retail space to a small coffee shop. You're not maybe even doing any structural changes. You're just painting and adding, little bells and whistles to the unit, adding a little wall divider. But again, you're changing the use. So that may, implicate the fire separations required between units in a commercial building. It may impact exiting routes or number of exits depending on the use. So it's really important when you're doing commercial alterations, even changing a garage to a finished space. That's also a change of use. So you want to get a permit for that as well, because there's a lot of safety and health standards to maintain. Just going to go through a few bylaw sections here. The highlight exemptions. So again, anything kind of more infrastructure is not regulated by the bylaw, but I did want to highlight this one here because it can be controversial, especially now in this day and age of small office buildings or small office units being placed on property, short-term rentals, those type of things. Accessory buildings not greater than 10 square meters and building area provided they are not used in occupancy. So again, not intended to be lived in. They're really a garden shed. The one thing that may be coming up as a change is the 12 square meters. And I see, Peter's also put some notes in here in the chat, so you may want to check on upcoming changes to the bylaws. The following stages of work in 44. These are listing the minimum inspections, particularly with residential construction. These have been expanding and will continue to alter as we go along, as the building process becomes more complicated. And we've had Richard has explained to me that there has been some issues, so they're kind of segregating some of the inspections a little bit more in detail, which again may delay, but it also may help avoid any problems in the process. You kind of have to look at it in two ways when you're thinking about inspections. It's there to ensure there's minimum standards being met through the phases of auditing process, but it's also helping you as a builder to collect yourself and collect your trades and make sure that as through the stages, and there'll be probably a few more stages, and we'll go over that a little bit more in the end of the presentation. Obligations of the owner. So the owner's ultimately responsible. If you're a contractor, developer, and you may be acting on the owner, you may be a spec builder, so you are the owner. So you take a lot of responsibility, both in the national code, meeting those standards and requirements, particularly in the building and plumbing bylaw as well. There's also a section obligations of a constructor, and this is brought in, and it's been in standards for a very long time, and it's been brought into a lot of new model bylaws just to make sure that the person working or the persons working on site on behalf and being hired by the owner or the owner's agent, that there is a lot of responsibility taken. And if things go wrong, people just can't decide, well, it's not my responsibility to fix these things. Everybody has to play a part in this, and the bylaw outlines that. This is unique obligation of the authority having jurisdiction. Not a lot of bylaws have been written like this. There are nuances to what the responsibilities are, but it's really outlining the building official has a lot of authority, but they also have accountability and responsibilities. So particularly the end, if we look at point 62, the authority having jurisdiction shall issue a permit to the owner when, to the best of their knowledge, the applicable conditions as set forth in the bylaw and the other related bylaws. So again, it's just not building code and the building bylaw. There's a lot of other bylaws involved in the process. Basically, if you met all the requirements and the standards, and again, we have application forms and bylaws, and if you met all those, there isn't a refusal unless you haven't met those standards in that process. So it gives some responsibility on the building official side to keep the process going. In appeals, I had mentioned that, again, if you're having some difficulty with your building official, and really I'll let you know that internally they're always debating, they're always talking about building code items, plumbing code items, bylaw interpretations. And there's a lot of vetting internally when you have multiple persons in your staff. It's a little different when you have a small town when we have one building official and they're become the sheriff of the town. You don't want to take their bad side. But here, and my time, even the few days I was here in December, I heard a lot of discussion and changes and ideas about code interpretation. But you also have the appeal process, what I mentioned a few slides back, and the board. This is just outline the sections of why is the city asking for engineering, and there's 4 or 3 sections here, and you relate to part 4 of the BC Building Code, which we'll touch on this session and future sessions. So that's the heavy engineering, getting a professional involved. There's certain areas in part 9. A lot of area, part 9 was really built, set up back in the day to have a homeowner build their own house. That doesn't really happen anymore because it's so complex, and the timeframes and financial just don't really allow for that. But this part of the bylaw outlines when you want to use part 9, it's fine, but there's certain restrictions to using structural part 9, and if you don't, then you have to hire a professional to use that. And I know there's been some discussion about trusses and some other things in here that we can go through the session and future sessions, where the site conditions and size and complexity. So again, if the site gets really complex, we're moving into, I just saw on the city website, there's been some discussion about designs for the missing middle, the higher densities. So again, if you have multiple buildings on what was once perhaps a single family lot, you may have some civil engineering to deal about, because you got to deal with all the drainage, you got to deal with infrastructure in there. So that's where this bylaw can basically say, hey, this on the books appears fairly simple, but it can get complicated, or it's on a very difficult building site that professionals can be brought in as well. And speaking of professional design and review, it's outlined in section 54, and the city has a few forms. And again, we have to be mindful of these forms being filled out correctly and sealed. So there's a commencement of the project in a building permit application. You would supply the commitment of field design and field review. And in the end, there's basically a finishing off. We call those letters of assurance in BC. And it's basically an assurance that the building will be designed, or the component, a part of that building will be designed and reviewed by that engineer. And then at the end, when field reviews and construction is done, then you're signing off. So just want to be mindful. This will come into play a lot more for some projects as we move ahead. There's also the project contact list, and it's really important when you have multiple professionals. So you may have a geotech, you may have a structural, you may have, you may be working on a larger project. This session and most of the sessions moving forward will be small residential projects, part 9. But if you're dealing with a larger part 9 or into a part 3 building, a more complex building, the city will need you to list all the professionals, because what I believe doesn't happen in the Yukon and in Whitehorse specifically is you don't have a coordinating registered professional. And if there's somebody in the building side of things that, if I've missed that, let me know. But so you could have multiple engineers, you could have an architect, and what the coordinating registered professional is, making sure that they're all working together. And that was brought in BC in the mid 80s, when they were having large projects, and again, not having the engineers coordinate each other. And we call it the Cave on Food or Save on Foods case, where I think it was a day or the day after this big Burnaby store opened, the car park, which was on the roof, actually collapsed, and it collapsed into the grocery store. And that's because somebody wasn't overseeing what was happening on the engineering design and not talking to each other. And it's unfortunately happened in other cases. So that's why it's really important to, again, list all the professionals, list all the contractors, sub-trades working on the project. And it also relates to business licensing as well, to make sure everybody has a business license. The building and plumbing bylaw outlines some fire smart requirements in your country residential zones 1 and 2, and what's happening down in ALA may heighten. I've been working with some other jurisdictions here in BC, and some of the councillors are now getting very, very concerned about, should we take a harder stand on how we're building buildings. So one, they're going to be affected by a firestorm moving in, and if it's really a very aggressive fire, it's probably not a lot can be done, but in most cases, when you're into that interface area, you don't want those embers lighting a house on fire or a building on fire. So there's ways of mitigating that. And you also don't want a fire starting from inside a building, actually getting out into the landscaping and then out into the wildfire interface. So there's two different things that you can look at in the bylaw. And here, be very mindful you're designing and building out that there are some stipulations regarding your landscaping at time of occupancy. And just to finish up the bylaws section, there are other bylaws that play a part in the development. So if you're looking at a small lot development, consolidation of properties to do a development to deal with, and it's really important that you have a good understanding of that. I do also know that the Whitehorse has some incentive policies when it comes to multifamily development, higher density development. So you might want to look at in that and be involved in all the changes that are happening with zoning regulations as the city looks to densify its properties. You'll see this slide a couple times throughout the session. When in doubt, reach out. You know, you can always reach out to your building department, the planning department. The next slides will have actual contact information here. You can go online. The city has a fairly decent website, and it does have quite a bit of forms and checklists. Those are being updated, so be mindful of that. But I would put this into your routine of you're checking on the website, you're checking in as a proactive developer, builder, or industry stakeholder. And if you have a question, you're thinking of doing something renovation wise or new construction wise, even thinking about using a different kind of product or a different way of building that you've been seeing somewhere else, that it's really important to reach out. It's not a big town, so there's no excuses really not to stay in communication. This is a poll question again. You can think about this or put in the chat. What legal document must be provided by a registered professional time of the building application stage? And again, I had mentioned there's a few different documents there. And basically, it's a confirmation of the professional assurance of a field review and compliance. Because basically, or the confirmation of professional assurance, design and commitment for a field review. So you can see by the nuancing of the word here, it's the commitment for the field review, it's the design. So the design is meeting code and the bylaws, and then the commitment for field review. So that's the form that you want to bring in. I have about 10 slides here. So, and after that, I think we'll take a break. But if you haven't, again, if you have any questions of what I spoke about the regulations. So now we've gone through the multi-level layers of federal, provincial, or territorial and local bylaw jurisdiction and building regulations. And now we're just going to go through a quick and in some aspects a deep review of the national code and how it was developed. Not necessarily the history. I did do that in a workshop, but what I can tell you is, and we established that in the previous slide, is that codes are developed for things that have happened, bad things. I had mentioned the Kalon Foods, fires, persons falling downstairs, and those type of things. And the codes have been modified, and now we're seeing a lot of changes because of climate change and other things regarding higher density. So the codes are continually evolving. But the national code was set up through the National Research Council that all provinces, all territories, and local jurisdictions can use and model after. Codes are the minimum standards. Codes are created, again, for the worst case scenario, which in our industry as a building official, people die, people get sick. And then there's the financial implications. And if you are aware what was happening in BC and other jurisdictions in the 90s, it was the leaky condo crisis, where billions of dollars were spent fixing buildings that should never have to been fixed. And that was a compounding of different issues where the codes had changed, the trades, and even the building officials weren't totally up to speed on building science. Poor detailing previously was actually enhanced by sealing up the building. So again, when you seal up the buildings is great because it becomes more energy efficient. But if you're still using the same old ways of detailing the building envelope, you're not allowing those walls to dry out. So there's a compounding factor of things that happened that led into many, many changes, particularly here in BC, but also nationally. We've had whole subdivisions in Alberta burned down because they built them too close. And that, unfortunately, through history, has happened too many times, and we forget the past in history. But really, we have to think about worst case scenarios. And sometimes when your building official and yourself on site are debating, or a designer debating something, it's like, what is really the big deal? Well, the big deal is something bad can happen, and we're trying to avoid that as best we can. And really, codes are the worst you can legally build to. Our friend Mike Holmes, I hear he's in a little bit of hot water now with some projects, but it's really, if you're not building to minimum code, then what really are you building to? And again, that's why the city has brought me on board, and we've as a city, they want to work with the building industry to really try to raise the bar for themselves, make sure that their building officials are they're fully staffed, they're fully trained, so they don't have to follow prescribed association requirements, like in BC, where all building officials have to take mandatory training and certification. They voluntarily have done that, so they've raised the bar for themselves. They've addressed permit processing. They're looking at updating their forms and their bylaws and their software systems. They're just really, in these sessions here, really asking for the building industry itself to come alongside and move along and improve as a whole. And codes have moved away from just safety, health requirements. They've now to accessibility, or have been for decades, but now we have energy efficiency, and there'll be changes. And regardless of whether it's in a bylaw or in a code, things related to wildfire interface and climate change as a whole. And you're seeing it probably in Whitehorse. You're seeing climate. When I was there, it was minus 15 one day, and then it was plus 5 3 days later. There's some really strange things happening now in the climate, and I also believe that there's some things happening that we really need to take and address in future codes. And the national standards, there's 4 basic codes nationally. There's the building, the plumbing, fire, and energy. And here, for our future reference moving forward, I'll be mostly concentrating on the building and in part 9 of the building. The NBC is made up of 2 volumes. There's volume 1, and then there's volume 2. And volume 2 is really dedicated to part 9 sections. It's really based on objective based code format, relying now more on objective and functional statements. So I'll go over that a little more. There's a rhyme and reason to why these items are in the code, and actually the code explains it when you're trying to achieve it. In volume 1, it is broken down into 3 main divisions. There's division A, compliance objectives and functional statements. Division B, and acceptable solutions, which I've highlighted, and I will go over that in a few slides from now. And Division C is administrative. A lot of people just think about what the code is, whether it's building or plumbing. They only look at one part of the code, if they do happen to look at code or the bylaws. But there's the 2 other parts that are really important to understand, because they all fit into each other. Division A defines the scope of the NBC and prevents the objectives that the code, and addresses the functions that the building must perform to help satisfy those objectives. Division A cannot be used alone. It's supplemental to the rest of the code. It includes standards and references. So when we talk about permanent wood foundations, we're looking at S406-16. You have to be very aware of the standard and the date reference of those standards. It outlines defined terms and objectives and the functional statements. And we talk about functional objective statements. This is where, when you look at a clause, so let's say height over stairs, this is in part 9. It gives an example why this has been developed. And again, they just don't make these things up. Over time, this has been in the code since the 40s, and it's been modified ever since then because things have happened. You no longer see winders to a point here in BC. Because they're not that safe. So now they've changed those, and there's a description why. So when you look at these sentences, and then you go to the objective and functional statements within Division A, you can see that there's sentences 2, 3, and 4 at the lower left corner of the slide, the height over stairs. And you'll see it's F30, OS 3.1, F10, and those all relate to objective and function statements. And then you can find within the code, and again, the only problem with the digital code, it's not very functional. and I know they're working on that to make it a little easier to move with hyperlinks and that, but for time you can work yourself through it. So the functional statements, the objectives of this code are achieved by measures such as those described, acceptable solutions. If you see a note like A-3 or A-9, those are appendix notes. And when you're in the national code, you can actually click, you can actually move your cursor over top of that defined word or the appendix note reference, and it'll actually hyperlink. The only problem is it won't take you back. So you have to remember where you were and scroll through. But the functional statements you can see here for F, 10, which is referenced in here in height over stairs, to facilitate the timely movement of persons to a safe place in an emergency. So again, you sometimes run into this in really old homes that you have to bend your neck down to get down. What happens if you're in the smoke alarms went off? See this in short-term rental requests where they actually say, hey, they want to develop part of the basement as part of their rental unit or even a secondary suite, but you have to gain access up the stairs to get in and out. Well, you don't want people going like this at 2 o'clock in the morning, creaking their neck. So what will happen is they'll run out if they're not used to the scenario of having a low stair and crack their head and get knocked out and die in a fire. So again, that's why we want to make sure that these elements are taken care of. And then to minimize the slippage, persons, and then you go into objective statements, tripping, slipping, falling, contact, drowning, collision. It's covering a wide base of things, but it's letting you know there's a thought process to this. The other part about Division A, and I just threw this in here last night because I've been doing a lot of work with the Manufacturer Association and some code ideas about moving this forward. But here in the national code, when I was there, I really understand, and I think I understand because it's just a matter of supply and manufactured housing. If you don't have a viable plant here locally in your community, it's coming from very far distances. But I just wanted to make sure that people are aware you are allowed, manufactured housing. The code in itself doesn't really outline manufactured housing very well. It's very light in its reference. So I just want to provide some standards. So these standards are referenced in the code. So the Z240s, your modular small unit, Z240 doesn't have to meet the minimum of code. Is built to a different standard, the Z240 series standard for manufactured housing. Don't use mobile homes. Mobile homes it's no longer on wheels and you pull it around. You can see two examples on the bottom of the screen. There's also A277, which is a code compliant. They're built either as modules or they're built as components, panels, and they all have to be certified in the plant and labeled and shipped out. And the nice thing about that, again, it's most of it's built in a factory, then you're shipping it on site. And it could take care of some of the issues that you might see regarding your weather restrictions you have there. There's a note here from Richard. Does a FireSmart document cover the identification of the issue of global fire spread, whereby one house can ignite buildings downwind from the embers? Yeah, and again, that's a really important thing because right now the zoning, or sorry, your building bylaw only deals with zone. I believe the other items outside the building. I'm just going to go back to that because it's a really important note. So this one here. So you can see the zone 1 is the yard and zone 2 is the yard. It's really the landscaping. That's at time of occupancy. What you do after occupancy, it's kind of, somebody to maintain themselves. But really the part of non-combustible zone, home, 0, you can see in the top 0 to 1.5. That's where you're starting to look at, and the bylaw doesn't, and most bylaws right now don't. But I think it will, and even codes will start demanding when you're in wildfire interfaces, and this will be driven by insurance companies no longer insuring homes or buildings anymore if you don't meet certain requirements. And that was what happened in Linton. And there are actually some fire resistant rated walls now been developed by RDH. They're a building science. And, again, it adds cost, but again, what is the cost of losing your home when you don't have to lose the home, spreading fires between each other? Thanks. And I'll look at that with looking at the chat again. We're going to talk more about that as we move forward. Volumetric modular projects. So again, not just small, single wide, double wide, A277, which could be a house built on a foundation, but we're also looking at volumetric. So you could have a very large building shipped into town in components and set up. So you can imagine once you get the foundation and servicing in, it'd be quite quick. And this standard, actually, if you're interested in looking at something like that, it's not in the code. It's not a standard requirement. It's more of a guide, and it actually is a guide with all industry partners. It's talking about how the building officials get involved, how the local community jurisdiction works through the process with the business industry or the building industry partners to make sure it's a smooth process. Because the biggest issue with any time of manufactured home, especially volumetric, all the permits have to be in place and fully understood before they actually begin production. So the sooner approval or pre-approvals can be developed and there's no changes required, then the building process can start right away. Division B, and I mentioned acceptable solutions. The term acceptable solution refers to the technical requirements contained within the code. It reflects the principle that the building codes establish an acceptable level of risk or performance and underlines, so again, acceptable level of risk or performance, and underlines the fact that the code cannot describe all possible valid design and construction options. Acceptable solutions represent the minimum level of performance that will satisfy the national code objectives. That acceptable that the authority here locally in Whitehorse, building official, adopts the NBC in the law and regulations. And again, it's an acceptable solution to meeting a requirement within the code to build to a minimum code requirement. The acceptable solutions are linked to at least one objective and functional statement, which we went over previously. Why is it in the code? Well, it outlines the functional objective statements in it. Climatic data is, let me just go back, sorry. Yeah, divisions B. Climatic data is found in Appendix C. Whitehorse and climatic zone 7B, I'm sure you're well aware of that. We had been talking about some frost protection depths, and it's quite drastic in Whitehorse. What I'm compared to Vancouver, where I used to work, it's 18 inches. So you guys got a lot of work, and I understand some of the complications and some of the soil conditions that you're entering into new subdivisions are really creating some grief. Just put a little note right below that highlighted yellow box on the top right, is that in the code, it actually, when you're dealing with Z240, those manufactured home units, there are some relaxations to frost protection in there. So again, maybe something in mind. I think that's something to review with your building authorities to make sure that's still a good idea. But here, when we look at climatic data, I just wanted to reference, and you'll see on the bottom screen, there's Whitehorse, Fort St. John, and Kelowna. And obviously your design temperatures are quite drastic compared to, say where I am in Kelowna. But when you look, I was really surprised that actually the annual precipitation, snow and rain, is actually lower in your area. So I always thought Whitehorse was a high snow load, but my understanding, and I think what's going to happen through code cycles, that is changing. You are experiencing a little bit warmer, you are getting a little bit more snow, and you're probably getting a little more wet snow, which actually is increasing some of your load calculations there. Your seismic data review, and I just wanted to bring this up because this is going to be a significant change coming up for us here in BC starting this March. That all homes, Part 9, Part 3, are all going to fall under new stringent lateral load and seismic design requirements, and I believe that's also going to be happening in the national codes as they roll out too. So it's very mindful, and I would like to touch on this in session 3, I think, regarding framing, that we will talk about this a little bit. They're not so when we're talking about seismic and lateral load, we're talking about design of wall panels to resist lateral load and designing. And I have another slide on this, but we're not talking about shear walls or anything like that. But you do have to put this into your memory bank of these things happening and changing. Division B, Part 9. I'm not sure why I had the climatic data in there, but I'll change that for future presentations. Division B, I just want to touch on these L items today, and then we'll jump into some very specific permit requirements. So we have applications and definitions, materials, and structural requirements. 9.1 to 9.3 of the NBC, floor area limits secondary suites, which is different than the BC building code. There's outlines for concrete, and just to be aware that when you see designs, unless they're through a professional, engineer, there's no requirements for rebar in concrete, other than when you deal with flat insulating concrete formwork, which is ICF, insulated concrete formwork. It's prescriptive in the code. So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding out there, and even designers don't really have to put rebar in designs. They technically shouldn't, because they're not a professional engineer. So it's really up to the standards of, that builder that wants to put that rebar in, because it's probably can prevent some issues happening later on. But unless it's a registered professional, nobody should be designing that other than the prescriptive measures for ICF. In there, there's also other items when you're dealing with subdivisions. You want to understand the soil and the soil materials, not only for what we deem as ice lensing, that those type of soils that are adverse to freezing, but there's also certain soils in the community that are adverse to even concrete. And I know here in the Okanagan, there's some major issues with soil conditions actually eating into concrete unless the right admixtures are in there. There's cold weather requirements, which is kind of a funny thing, because for many, many months of the year, you're in definite cold weather conditions. But I think it's, we have to understand as an industry that you're not gonna heat and hoard your whole development site during the winter. But are there other precautions that can be taken at different stages of the construction? And I think, when I was there, I was really surprised to see that how many heating units are going into buildings, and seeing the amount of frost leaking out of the buildings, developing on the building envelope on the outside, and the interiors. So you have to be really, really mindful of the amount of water that you're putting into the building. And I will touch on that in a slide coming up. So here's structural requirements 9.4. So this is where it outlines when you're doing a Part 9 home, a house, a simple building, an accessory building. It outlines to prescribe how you can work in Part 9 and not need an engineer. Or maybe you need an engineer for your foundations because of the soil conditions or the way the foundations are being constructed. But the other parts, reflected to Part 9. So when you look at the left side at 9.4.2, specific loads, and you go into A and B and C, the roof and wall planes to be clad, sheathed, or braced at least one side. Again, that's usually your OSB. Small repetitive structural members spaced not more than 24 inches in center, 600 millimeters in center. Again, clear span of any structural member does not exceed 12.2 meters, which I believe is 40 feet. So if you have a truss that's greater than 40 feet, that's designed to Part 4 now, not Part 9. And again, even the engineered design, there's been some debate, and I'll touch on that on a slide coming up, that an engineered truss is an engineered product, and it should have an engineer designing that and sealing that. And again, I know there's some discussions there. And I also wanted to reference on the slide, again, going back into the bylaw, that, again, these engineered components, an engineered product as a whole, if it's not meeting Part 9 prescriptive requirements outlined here in 9.4.2, you're looking at bringing in an engineer. Specific snow designs. And I think, again, being very mindful that as climate change happens, whether you agree or disagree how it's happening, something weird's going on, and you're really seeing that happen in really dry summers and now wetter, warmer winters, which is really going to impact your snow loading. And just a calculation of how you're looking at this, and being mindful of where you're using balconies as part of a roof structure. Again, there's some prescriptive measures there. If you weren't aware, adding solar panels. I saw a lot of solar panels, which I think is a fantastic idea. For majority of the year, you're getting a lot of sunshine. And, but the national code, and now the BC code have adopted a similar format, that those need to be evaluated by an engineer. So again, when the truss is being reviewed, those have to be designed to, if you're putting a solar panel system in, that those have to be designed. You also have to be aware of, if you're not putting solar panel, but you're putting, maybe a metal roof, and you're putting these snow dams, these snow locks in place, that those are holding snow. And now you're changing the dynamics of how that snow is sitting on the building and collecting drifting snow. And we have to take those precautions into those aspects there. We have to be mindful. The next session 2, we're going to do a deep dive on some of the issues that you're facing as a city. You can see here, this is a map of Whitehorse, and soil conditions all over the place, particularly in your Whistle Bend, one of your newer subdivisions. I think you have a lot of soils in there are very susceptible to freezing, which becomes some very significant, has bearing capacity issue, but really backfill issues where frost can really aggravate your foundation system. So again, you're seeing a lot more engineering for that. When we look at soil bearing footing design, you're looking at 944, the foundation conditions, and we're going to do again another deeper explanation in session 2 in this. But I just wanted to show you what's going on here, and we'll go through some of the subdivisions, some of the soil reports, and outline what we're typically dealing with. When you're dealing with your older subdivisions, the Copper Ridge, or I can't remember the specific name, those are a lot of free draining soils in there, and you didn't probably see a lot of problems. Now you're seeing soil condition issues, one for bearing complications, uneven, again, the soil conditions freezing and moving and heaving. We have to really, take this into mind, and why the city is becoming a little bit more aggressive in looking at engineering. When you go into Division C, you're looking at administrative items. I just showed here because Richard and I have talked about this quite a bit. You do have your building bylaw, and that's really what you need to stand on as a local government and the way you move forward administering permits and code. But here, and it's really old. It's a 1985 document, and it basically outlines the exact same things: how, when you need a permit, how you issue a permit. So I just wanted to outline again, reinforcing within the code itself of why permits are important and regulated. Division C really outlines some basic parameters of how you design structurally. And this is one here, structural design for design carried out in accordance with Part 4. It really wants, that design professional to be very detailed, to be very specific, but also to be aware of what's happening on adjacent buildings. So again, when you're looking at an excavation, an infill excavation, when you're looking at excavation in a situation where you could impact another property, you have to look at those aspects as well. Division C also has alternative solutions. We had mentioned earlier in the presentation that alternative solutions, could be used as part of to meet the requirements of acceptable solutions. So Division B, all in there. Every page says acceptable solution in Division B, whether it's a Part 3 building, a Part 9 building. And if you can't, or you haven't met something screwed up on site, or for one particular reason you can't meet that acceptable solution, that line item in the code, that section in the code, you could propose an alternative solution. Again, as long as the alternative solution makes sense. And again, you want to say, this is the code requirement. This is why, why it's a problem, why you can't meet it. And this is what we'd like to do, but this is how we're going to achieve the intent or the objective and function statements. Not that the owner doesn't like it and that's why we're changing it. Not that it costs too much. Those aren't really good excuses. They're a valid concern, but they're not part of the acceptable and then alternative solution process. And when you're also looking at developing, say something goes wrong or you need to change a design, you have the objective and function statements, but you can have this older document. And there's I have some links here, and if I didn't mention, there's a number of links throughout the presentation that you can go to. There's an intent statement. It actually gives a deeper dive of why it's in the code and why it's important. But you just have to be mindful. This is a very old document. It's 2015. It hasn't been updated. I hope when the 2025 code comes in that we can actually see this intent statements, which links to the objective and functional statements. So just a question, when we look at where acceptable solutions found in the NBC, and as just noted, they're in Division B. So acceptable solutions, and then you can move into Division C and look at alternative solutions. So we're just going to take a quick break. I just need to take a bio break. Not 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So at 9:05, we'll come back. So I'm just going to turn my camera off and just give me 5 minutes and we'll be right back. Thank you.
Sorry, that's 10:05 Yukon time. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. 10:05. Hello, everybody. We're going to start the session back up again. See if we lost a few people, but just bear with me about another 20 minutes, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have, and then we'll set the stage for our next session, actually next week, session 2. So I'm going to jump into this, back into this right now. Make sure I have the right slide deck here. So the next few minutes, we're just going to go over the permitting process. I know there's been, consternations about how long permits took last year. There's kind of it was a perfect storm, unperfect storm of many things happening, or unfortunately the building division lost some staff members. Applications got really busy all at once. And then processing, again, people were, it was a bit of a kludge, and the city acknowledges, and again, why they brought in a consultant to review kind of the process as a whole, and been working with council on that, or even myself, wanting to do some do some presentations and codes and permits, and then work with some of the junior staff. So we're going to talk about part 9, the permitting process, and this is something new. There's been changes happening along the way the last few months, and this is one change. So when you're looking at the building permit process, it used to be like a 2-step process where there's quite an extensive, quite an in-depth review of the site conditions and infrastructure, which you don't see in some other communities. It's kind of like building permit process, and it gets reviewed on the go. Whitehorse, again, is very unique. It has very unique challenges, pretty in our, in newer subdivisions or infill developments. And there had always been a 2-step process. For the smaller projects now, it's a parallel process. So I developed this flow to try to make sense of it. So you have a development permit process. You need very detailed site plan information that we'll go over. You'll be working with being reviewed by the planning and for planning information, engineering information, development officers. I was reminded by Richard to put, if you're using a permanent wood foundation, because it does have some ramifications on how those are reviewed. But you start your development permit process, and then you can start your building permit process. And at some point in time, the development permit process review is completed and move over to the building permit, and then you move forward with the issuance of the building permit, and then it flips back to the end, which we'll go over in the next few slides. Again, when in doubt, reach out. Some contact information now, phone numbers, and email. So if you're considering renovating or building new, and you just want to make sure you're on the same page as a city, by all means, reach out to them, especially as designer, just to make sure that you haven't missed one of the newer changes coming out on it. There we go. So the DP process, there's a number of forms to be filled in, and I just wanted to be, one main point is crucial to ensure that all the information provided at the time of development permit application. So you have your building permit and your development permit, you kind of going in at the same time. You really want to make sure that whatever form you're looking at, that you understand it, and then you're reading it, because when it comes to new construction and residential, there's certain extra forms to be filled in. You want to make sure, again, you have your project information, your detailed site plan, your lot grading plan, your fees, and your declaration all together and ready to go. Because what happens most time with applications, and why permit processing does take longer, is piecemealing information and missing information or incorrect information, and then revisions are required, and that really slows the process down on both sides of the review. When you look here, Form 3B, it's looking more at your zoning requirements, and it's really important to make sure all that information is filled out so it can be audited by the development officer. And if you have, you may have a living or garden suite, there's also a form that goes along with that. This is a really great document. It was produced a few years ago, the City of Whitehorse Development Guidelines for Lot Grading. I'm assuming it'll probably be modified and updated as we go along through this year and into next year. But I just want to make sure that you are aware of it as a developer, builder, designer, even a tradesperson. Just a tradesperson, you're a huge important piece of this, and the more you can learn about the process as a whole, or if you're a builder, you can get your trades involved in understanding the process as a whole as integrated design, you have a fully involved team at the design stage, but also through the build out stage. It's really important. This is one document that is really well done. It outlines, again, lot grading plans. Quite the statement can go sideways pretty quick in Whitehorse because there's really nowhere to go unless you're moving the water away from the building. So they have, slope designations in here. And again, I have a link to this guide. But just wanted to highlight the roof drainage requirements is something that Richard and team continue to try to remind me that. So, well, where's this going? Where's your drain tile? So we don't do drain tile because it doesn't go anywhere. It goes through the sump system. Again, what do you do with your roof drainage? It has to go down. It's where does it go down into the ground, into the pipe? So it doesn't. That was a learning moment for me. Where does it go? Well, there's some very detailed outlines here in the guide that it's going to swales. You're controlling it away from the building, moving to the back or to the front, and then in some cases moving to the front onto the city side of things where the water's being dealt with. So those are your roof drainage and then your swale system. So being very mindful to understand this guide, I think it will help you a lot. And then your lot grading plan. There's a number of examples in the guide. You want to ensure that all the information there, to list all the information on there to show a little pretty picture of there. So, at minimum, try to get all that done. Note that the infill lots require additional information. I would tend to always think, talking with my plan reviewers as a manager or designing a building, an infill building is thinking 5 feet beyond the property lines. Because when you excavate, what's going to happen? If you're not really in tune to and we're going to go over that in session 2 quite a bit, and really to work safe as well as not being, kind of a bad neighbor for your neighboring properties and infill is what happens when you excavate at the property lines. Well, you're probably going to see erosion, and then that erosion is going to lead into what's happening next door. What happens if you have an established house next door and has landscaping? You want to make sure that you're tying into those. There's a good transition with those neighboring properties, and that sometimes at the end of a project, in order to get final sign off, you may have to provide a separate survey, a lot grading certificate to make sure you're within the issued permit drawings. And again, you're relating to the properties next door to you. The DP and BP process, so again, looking up to 3 residential units. I just put this together and modified it slightly from a slide or 2 ago. That you have a DP and a BP parallel review process, which is great. I think it's great. It could speed up the process, but it also comes with some potential issues. And that's when revisions are made on one side of the review, your BP or DP versus the other, or revisions are made. So you could have changes that are required. You could have revisions that maybe something has been changed by the owner or the developer. You continually have to talk to each other to make sure that, the designer, the builder, everybody knows what's going on, and drawings are being updated and reviewed properly. But the flip side is the building department's really going to try hard to communicate internally. They're going to have to communicate internally when things are happening, because really what used to happen is you had a finalized DP and all those DP documents slid into the BP process, and then you went along. Well, now you can imagine you're going and things start changing on the fly at the review stage, and they're not being communicated out. Then you're going to have some real big problems. The permit could get issued and not everybody's fully aware of a change, and it become problematic on the process. So just be mindful of that as we go through these changes in the process. Much like the DP application, it's critical to ensure the BP application is filled out in full. All required information is provided. The city has gone to great lengths to develop a permit package. I know that probably be modified as we go along in 2025 to make it more functional, but it's really important. You can see here the foundation only permit request on this picture on the right side of the slide. And I do understand the reasoning for that. We typically wouldn't see that unless it's a very large project. By the time you have your permit drawings in place and your DP, you're probably already in a process to start building. So, but they do allow for that. But in all cases, you do want to get all the information on these forms. In 2025, you may have already seen it already at the tail end of 2024. The building department's going to take a lot harder line on incomplete applications because, again, as I mentioned, those are the ones that really eat into the time of staff. So if they're not complete and they have to pick up the phone or send in emails like, oh, you're missing this, and can you clarify this? They're wasting time for everybody who's prepared and put in a proper application form. So they're slowing the whole process down. So that kind of that tough love aspect, I think is going to happen. Again, the city is really raising the bar for themselves and improving process and guides and forms. They're just asking again your community members, your industry members do the same, and that starts with the application. Make sure again the DP and the BP, especially the site grading, the infrastructure information is all there, is servicing information. And when you're having garden suites and infill living suites, that is indicated on an application form as well. It's really important to get the owner's acknowledgement filled in. That's part of the package, as well as when you look at the remainder of the package, the permit package online, or pick up a hard copy of it. There's a very detailed list of what needs to be on a drawing. And as a designer, I go to great lengths to try to put more information in than I think I may even need to, because it's better to have more information on there than less information on there, and especially your sections. And just taking a bit of time as a designer just to fill in the blanks, because again, you don't want the building inspectors to be adding notes and stickers and those type of things. Basic information about smoke alarms and guards and all these kind of things should be on the drawings as a standard practice. And it should just be an audit for the building official to make sure that it's code compliant. So when you're looking at drawings, they should show substantial compliance of the codes and bylaws. It shouldn't just be a reference point, and then we'll fill in the blanks later in the permit review process or on site. You want to make sure everything's set out. And again, really important to bring in all your parties involved in the project, your tradespeople, to make sure you have all the information, everybody's on the same page as you get going. There's multiple ways of applying. This is off the city website. And note, you want to apply early. You don't want to leave it to the last few weeks before you want to start your project. That happened last year, and you got tons of applications coming in. And how that it's like an ice jam. You throw all this ice into the river and it gets jammed up. Well, it's not going to move very quickly, right? So you want to, if you got a project right now that can be brought in, cleaned up, brought in for permit weeks and weeks ahead of time, then do that now to allow for the team to review those, especially as there's been changes going on. So you may not realize there's a change, and it's like, oh, okay, I need to provide a revision. I need to outline this a bit more. So apply early. Just some information regarding trusts and floor plans. There's been some changes. So as always, this one isn't really a big change. You do need your layout information for your floor systems and your truss systems to make sure that the building officials can review those, especially for point loads. Application for professional involvement outlined is in the building bylaw in 9.4 of the code. There will be more, single family home projects involving engineering. So communicate with your building department and your building officials about the process and some of the factors why. I mentioned a few, but new home designs, they're narrower. You're building in lots that aren't really square anymore. It's square homes. You're building in very tight lots, higher density developments. And so the homes are longer and narrower, and they have more open floor plans. So you can just think of a bookshelf and you start, moving it back and forth side to side. That's a lot of lateral load. And I talked about that as an idea to keep in your head when lateral load and seismic design. Larger point loads going on as well. And you're looking at increased engineering components, so different types of products being used, proprietary products that now are not really outlined in the code as well. And then we're having, more serious issues with soil conditions. So again, more engineering of all those, and we'll go over those through sessions 2 and 3 in more depth. The city provides an outline of the conditions of a permit. So now we're into the issuance stage. So building permit issue when all required revisions, confirmations, and payments have been provided. The city provides an outline of the conditions of the permit. This is an example of a plumbing permit, but when you do get your permit package, please review the permit condition letter. It's really important to understand. Excuse me, just take a drink. It's really important to understand that, to review it with your team to make sure there's no misunderstandings. If you have, a question, reach out to the building official that issued it, or set up a meeting or on construction site consultation as soon as possible. Make sure there's no problems on there. And at all times keep the permit package on site, because one, the building official needs it. Again, there'll be some time in the future where, again, it may be all digital, but what is your team as a builder referring off of as a document or documents? If your tradespersons come on, or your framing crew or your foundation crew comes on, what are they looking at? If they're not looking at the permit issue drawings, then it could be a lot of mistakes happening and misunderstandings, and then on top of the structural issues that you need to take care of. The inspections themselves, this is a list, and there's been one change in the process. Framing has been split out, and I'll go over these pretty quick here because I'm running out of time. But there are some standard inspections that will be listed on your permit condition letter, and there will probably be some more modifications as we go along. And this is your inspection report, and eventually they'll probably move into a digital format as well. All your inspections will probably be dealt with on phone or by email. So siding and foundation, this is the most critical. I believe is one of the most critical inspections, because it allows for you, your building official, and your team on the building side of things to really understand, what you need to do, how you're going to move forward with it. If there's already some changes being made, you start digging the hole. It's like, well, okay, some modifications are happening here. But at minimum, most inspections, and I'm going to list a few, and this will be part of the guide. So again, I may not be able to go this in detail, but on these slide decks that'll be sent to you, and the presentation recorded, this will all be built into the guide that's going to be outlined, brought out in March. But you want to have good communication, understanding at the start of the project with you, your team, and your building official. So you want to make sure your permit placards, your issued permit package is on site. There's no issues related to site safety, infill development issues, and you're working with the limits with, if you're in a protected area, creek or slope setbacks and those type of things. So this is really important. There'll be a number of documents to be required, and when you go into a continuation of this, then the building official is then going to start looking at your approved drawings, look at your structural drawings that may be associated with that. They're not there to say yes or no to your structural, because that's their job. But if they do find mud filled forms, and the engineer was out the day before something happened, that's something they're going to need to address as a potential issue. They're looking at a visual zoning setback requirements, and then dealing with some plumbing items. So again, I'm going to go through these pretty quick with my time involved. So your second step would be a foundation, damp proofing, and plumbing. So there'll be some basic items. If you have some minor deficiencies, from the previous inspection, those should be dealt with. You don't want to keep carrying those through. And really the main thing I wanted to get out on this one is there's going to be some standard things that the building official is going to look at, but it's really important, if there's issues, before you backfill, you need to have those dealt with. You don't want to continue on any loose ends. So this is a benchmark inspection where, again, before this gets all signed off and approved for filling in, once you get your floor framing system in, and you can start moving ahead. The building inspector may stop work a project if there's a lot of deficiencies outlining here. We can't carry these through as a benchmark inspection. Framing, again, I mentioned this is one item's been split apart, so the building official will take a detailed review. They'll be relying on a professional engineer if there's a structural engineer involved. There's certain things that the structural engineer is going to look at, but there's a lot of things that the building official still needs to look at. So you still need to call for this inspection, even though you have a structural engineer involved. And a lot of things to deal with in the middle here in the slide deck is back framing, fire blocking, your stairs, your headroom clearances. Again, you may be looking at window sizes, so that may relate to spatial requirements. So again, how many windows are you allowed to the side property lines and interior side yard lot development? And if those have changed, it may come into impact if you're using energy performance modeling instead of just basic prescriptive R values. If you start changing and moving around windows, that could actually mess up your performance for your energy performance modeling. So again, all these peripheral things. So just if you do have a structural engineer, you still need this as it's a key component to it. I had mentioned some of my concerns driving around town in December about the amount of heating and water being introduced into these buildings. Be mindful that the code has set limits of 19%, and I'm going to guess that you may be achieving. And once that framing is done, and then you start insulating, it can become pretty problematic. Moving forward. I lived through that through the leaky condo crisis. You don't have the super wet conditions all year that you do here in BC and the coast, but you could start running into some big issues there. The big thing with framing is that you will need your sealed truss specs. Again, I know there's been a lot of debate on this, but again, the code has been pretty clear. And as outlined in here, this may seem a new requirement, but it isn't. This has always been within, I think just something happened along the way that it was kind of left off the radar. But again, it's really important to have this, especially if you got solar and you got other items that could be holding snow on top of the roof. You really want to make sure that those things are taken care of. The other thing on this one, just going back, is the bracing of your trusses to make sure that that's done. If there's any damage to, say, a TGI joist that from plumbing, that's one of the first things I usually look at. You want to make sure those are dealt with as well. Again, go around the site, check it off, make sure everybody's on the same page, and then call for your inspections. Be ready for your inspections. Insulation vapor barrier, again, just making sure that interior building envelope, the insulation, your vapor barrier, usually your air barrier too, if you're using poly, 6 mil poly, all that is done. It's all sealed. It has structural backing. It's secure. Again, be very mindful of the moisture content. Again, that could be problematic as well. This, as well as the mechanical inspection, is a benchmark inspection. Again, all the items that may have been brought up during a deficiency minor through the framing and now at this inspection, you need to have it completed before you move to the next step, because the next step is covering everything up. You also be, in framing, you don't want the insulation in there already, especially spray foam, because the inspectors want to look at that as well. So there's some nuance changes as you go along. Insulation and vapor barrier, again, plumbing. This is a very critical stage for the plumbing, and there's a number of items that they're going to be reviewing in that. So it could be combination, or it could be two separate inspections, but again, it's a benchmark inspection before you move ahead. And with your seasonal conditions of very cold winters, just making sure that your tests are being applied to it properly is really important as well. Heating and mechanical systems, really critical to have this set up. So you're looking at layouts, any updates to layouts for mechanical ventilation checklists, and occupancy. So you're moving into the end. You've hopefully cleaned up all the loose ends, and now you're moving into occupancy. Be prepared. There are some exceptions for having partial inspections, but really the building official wants to show up and deal with all the life safety standards as a final inspection, and make sure everything is there. It's really important to refer to your permit condition letter to make sure you have all your documents that you're required to have. You have your engineering sign off if you have the engineer. You should have your rough grading done. Those type of items as you move into a finalization of this project, and then finally your DP for hard servicing. Highlight the yellow section here. There's an occupancy or approval certificate will be issued when there's a clean final inspection. So again, your site inspection, so the building inspector will be looking again. There may be some loose deficiencies, probably not. You're hopefully not. There's no significant layout changes. Again, you haven't kind of changed. You haven't finished something that shouldn't have been finished. Your incandescent smokes and your carbon monoxide stair guards, handrails, your attic accesses, the general compliance with your visible, so your building envelope, your flashings, those type of things need to be done. Your decks and porches sloped away. And I know there's been some real problems in the newer subdivisions regarding frost protection and decks going up and down, and we'll talk about that. Your mechanical and plumbing systems all have to be commissioned and ready to go. And once your life safety is done, that completes your final inspection process. And now you move into the DP sign off. And once the DP sign off is done, then you're done the project. You can request a development permit inspection online and go through that process, but it's really the building, all the life safety, all the building component, all the building code stuff is all done, the bylaw stuff. And then they don't want to hold up things regarding as much as possible the occupancy part, which seemingly ties into the development permit application. Because again, we started parallel, we broke off the building, and now we're finishing up with the DP process. So that completes that overview. I just want to highlight what we'll be talking about next week. Our next session is excavation, footing, foundations, radon, and drainage requirements. We're going to touch on a number of items, including perhaps something you haven't been really familiar with is ICF, because Richard, I, and the building team do see it as a way of moving forward and moving away from permanent wood foundations, which is being, challenged in our new subdivisions with some of the soil conditions in there. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask me, again, I really appreciate the time you've taken. I think it's really important, and I really appreciate the time you've taken this morning it's really important to understand the permit and the bylaw and the codes, all the foundational things. So I think for you here attending, it'll be a better process for you moving forward. And I do welcome you to reach out to the building department, especially if you have a team, if you have a set team. You may even want to engage with your building official and sit down with your team individually. Just again, what is the building permit process about? What are the changes? What are the inspection process? What are the changes? So you as a builder, or even bringing in your designer, you as a team understand these processes. So there's no miscommunication or misunderstandings. And you as a team, your building team, has a really good understanding of the process and avoiding these issues. And I really welcome you back. Please let other industry stakeholders know more about these sessions. And again, these sessions will develop into a guide. So the more input we can get from these sessions, let me know. Send me an email, ken.flywheel@gmail.com. It really helped me in this process to help make my sessions better. We are going to be more interactive moving forward. We've kind of got through this clog of technology, or so not technology, but just written documents and forms. I do want to make it interactive. I do have a program, a CAD program I showed some of you at the workshop. We're going to use my CAD program drawings to show examples of excavations and foundations and framing and building and envelope stuff as we go, as well as a slide deck. And then again, those will be built out of updating the city forms. Peter, did you have anything to add about changes coming up for our building community to be aware of or to attend sessions?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate your presentation. So thank you for kicking us off on this series of webinars. I did mention in the chat we are currently doing, there's currently some changes to the building and plumbing bylaw that are in front of council right now. They were just introduced actually on Monday is when council considered them formally. So it is a process where there's 3 distinct readings that they need to give this bylaw in order to get an approval. So there's a little bit of time there. I will note that one of them is they are extending the permit timeframe from 6 months to 12 months. I think that will help some people who are looking to build during a certain time frame. I know that was one of the instances that happened with sort of the delayed lottery situation, and there could be other situations where you just can't get started within that 6-month time frame. So hopefully that helps. As you mentioned, Ken, they are also considering changing that accessory building size. Part of the reason for that is to exempt those smaller buildings. Currently, YG has 12 meters squared for their threshold of when a building permit would be required. So council was looking to sort of align those so that if you're inside or outside the city, you kind of have the same rules. So not approved yet, but those are some things. We've also got some recommendations to give a bit of a break on building permit fees for early submission. So you can essentially get like a 10% rebate on your building permit fees if you apply between a little bit earlier. It's basically between November and the end of February, I believe. So there's a few things happening there, lots of things happening in land and building, and we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or suggestions.
Thanks. Peter, I did want to show with the group where we may go on the drawings. I do know there's some examples here, so you can see, you should be able to see, this is a rough floor plan, and as we go along over the next few months, I'm going to develop, and again, work with the building officials, work with some designers, builders in town to make sure we have a good set of example drawings. But you can see here as a foundation, but in particularly what I wanted to show was, we can really look into different parts of the building. So there'll be a slide deck, but I also want to jump into here. There's been a lot of issues regarding decks and frost heaving and those type of things. We could be looking at wood foundations here and how those have to meet the new standards. And again, probably looking at engineering, but also ICF as a you wouldn't mix the two like this, but I just wanted to show examples and just items where, again, we could be looking at different types of foundations and the pros and cons of those. And again, we're probably only relating a few of these because some of them just don't work. They're not feasible economically or make any sense here. So I just wanted to show the members that that some of the tools I'd like to use, and where we see, a possibility to change our mindsets on both sides of the counter. These sessions will be an opportunity to do that and lead into better forums and guides that we'll be developing moving into March. So that's all I had. I don't see. Yeah, there's just, again, be mindful, again, as Peter noted, some of the changes that are happening, some changes that will be happening. And it's really all part of, the problems we've had over the last few years. And again, I've worked in a number of different communities, and I really see Whitehorse taking this seriously and moving ahead. But one thing, we mentioned a few times now, don't wait till the last minute to make your building permit application. If you have questions about, could there be certain issues coming up, reach out prior to, work with if you're a builder, work with your designer in conjunction, and work with your trades as an integrated design plan, move into the development permit and the building permit stage together, fully, understanding what's required, make it a complete application, and don't wait till the last minute. Because if you wait till the last minute, and again, there's incentives not to, as Peter mentioned. Thanks, Peter.
Great, thanks again. Appreciate it. These will be, this recording will be up on the website soon. So I may have to chop the front of it off as we waited a little while to start, but those should be up within the next couple of days if you know anybody that had to miss due to prior engagements. So thanks again, and thanks everyone else for attending.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.